When the CEO's heir told me my code was prehistoric, I just smiled. 3 weeks later, their billing system sent $13,200 invoices for just 1 cent. They thought I was a relic. But when the company went into free fall because of code lines they didn't understand, I was the one they called back this time with 5 words. We need you. My name is Mara Jensen. I'm 37, and until recently, I was the senior developer at Arcturon Systems, a mid-sized fintech company that processes over $30 million in transactions daily. Well, they used to process that much before everything went spectacularly wrong. Let me paint you a picture of Arcturon's billing system. Imagine a Victorian house that's been renovated 17 times by different contractors, none of whom left blueprints. Now imagine that house is responsible for moving millions of dollars between bank accounts every day. That was our codebase held together with the digital equivalent of duct tape and prayer, but remarkably stable. And I was the caretaker who knew where every creaky floorboard was, which light switches worked in mysterious ways, and which pipes would burst if you flushed the wrong toilet. I'd been there for 11 years. I was there when we migrated from our original PHP monolith to a Java backend. I was there when we switched payment processors 3 times in 2 years. I was there through 4 CEOs and 7 complete system overhauls. That never quite happened because the business couldn't stop making money long enough to rebuild everything properly. The current CEO, Richard Grant, wasn't terrible. He was a numbers guy who mostly left the technical decisions to people who understood them. That was the status quo for 6 relatively peaceful years, until Richard decided his son was ready for bigger responsibilities. Enter Tyler Grant. 26 years old, fresh MBA, 0 development experience, and my new boss? The first time I met Tyler, he was wearing what I can only describe as Silicon Valley cosplay Patagonia vest over a button-down, expensive jeans that had never seen a day of actual work, and Allbirds that still had that new wool smell. He walked into our Tuesday code review meeting 15 minutes late, carrying a Starbucks cup with Taylor written on it. Sorry I'm late, guys, he announced to the room of 8 developers who had been waiting. Had to finish up a call with the executive strategy team. There was no executive strategy team, it was his father and the CFO. Tyler sat at the head of the table and clapped his hands together. So, show me what we're working with here. Damon, our UI lead, had been preparing to demo our new reconciliation dashboard. But Tyler waved him off. No, I want to see the actual code. The foundation? He turned to me. You're Mara, right? Dad says you're the one who knows all the old stuff. Show me the core. I pulled up our repository on the projector. This is the main payment processing module. It handles, is that? Java 8. Tyler interrupted, squinting at the screen. And what's with all these comments? There's more comments than code. Those comments explain the workarounds for various banking APIs, I explained. Each bank has different, this looks like a dinosaur fossil with duct tape. He laughed, looking around the room for approval. No one joined in. You ever heard of TypeScript, Grandma? The room went silent. I'm 37, not exactly grandma territory, but Tyler seemed to think anyone over 30 was ancient in tech years. I took a deep breath. These modules process approximately $32 million in transactions daily. They've been running stably for 8 years with 99.9997% uptime. The duct tape you're referring to maintains compatibility with 3 different generations of payment APIs from 2012 onward. Tyler leaned back in his chair, twirling his expensive pen between his fingers. Yeah, but it's not scalable, not modern. We need to rebuild this from scratch with a proper microservices architecture, clean code. You know what I mean. He turned to Jasmine, one of our newer developers. You're familiar with Kubernetes and event-driven architectures, right? Jasmine nodded hesitantly, glancing at me with an apologetic look. Perfect. Tyler continued. I'm thinking we deprecate all this legacy stuff and start fresh. Containerize everything, serverless where possible, React front-end, maybe GraphQL for the API layer. I'd heard this song before. Every new technical manager wants to rebuild everything. It's easier than understanding what's already there. Tyler, I said calmly, a complete rewrite would take at least 18 months, and we'd need to maintain the current system during that time. We've tried incremental modernization. That's the problem right there, he interrupted, pointing at me with his pen. That kind of thinking is why we're stuck with this fossil. No offense, but that's the difference between your generation and mine. We move fast and break things. We process people's money, I reminded him. Breaking things means breaking people's ability to pay their bills. Tyler smiled in that way people do when they think you just don't get it. That's why we'll have a transition period. We'll build the new system alongside the old one. Dad's already approved 3 new developer positions. I'm thinking we bring in some fresh talent, people who aren't constrained by legacy thinking. The message was clear. I was the legacy that needed replacing. Over the next 2 weeks, Tyler hired 3 interns from his alma mater. They were bright kids with theoretical knowledge of all the latest frameworks, but zero experience with financial systems. He set them up in a separate room, the Innovation Lab. He called it and tasked them with rebuilding our entire payment processing system from scratch. Meanwhile, I was systematically removed from decision-making. First, I was taken off the architecture planning emails. Then my admin access to our AWS infrastructure was accidentally revoked. Finally, I noticed I couldn't see half our Jira tickets anymore. When I logged in one morning, I found my user had been renamed to Legacy Cleanup Use V1. I marched straight to Tyler's office. He was on his phone, feet up on the desk, talking about his digital transformation initiative to someone who was clearly a friend, not a colleague. What happened to my Jira account? I asked when he hung up. Oh, that, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. It is consolidating some user management stuff, temporary thing. And why was I renamed to Legacy Cleanup? He had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. That wasn't supposed to happen. Probably just a joke from one of the DevOps guys. I need access restored to the AWS console, I said. I can't monitor the payment reconciliation without it. Actually, Tyler said, sitting up straighter. We're restructuring how we handle system monitoring. The new team will be taking over those responsibilities. The interns, they don't even know what they're looking at. They're junior architects, not interns. Tyler corrected me. And they're implementing proper observability practices, Prometheus, Grafana dashboards, the works. That doesn't help me do my job today. Tyler sighed, as if I was being particularly difficult. Look, Mara, I've been meaning to talk to you about your role. The company is moving in a new direction, and we need to evaluate where everyone fits. I knew what was coming. I'd seen this movie before. Why don't we set up a meeting with HR tomorrow? He suggested. We can discuss transition plans. I nodded, walked back to my desk, and began preparing. Not for the HR meeting, for what would come after. Over the next 8 hours, I documented everything I could. I created backups of all the system maps, logic flows, and critical scripts. I compiled logs of every weird edge case we'd encountered over the years and how we'd solved them. I gathered the institutional knowledge that lived only in my head and put it into files. Then I stored all of it securely, not on any company systems. And I deliberately left no documentation of what I'd done. The HR meeting the next day was exactly what you'd expect. Tyler wasn't even there. He sent Brenda from HR and his father's executive assistant to do the dirty work. Arcturon is implementing a strategic realignment of technical resources. Brenda read from her tablet. As we modernize our systems, some roles are being phased out while new opportunities emerge. Translation: You're fired because Tyler thinks you're a dinosaur. Your last day will be today. We'll need you to hand over any ongoing projects to the transition team before you leave. I smiled. What specific information would they like? The executive assistant looked up from her phone. Tyler mentioned something about payment normalization functions and vendor integration configurations. I'll write up an overview, I said. The overview I provided was technically accurate but practically useless. It listed file names and general purposes but omitted the critical context, the why behind every workaround, the history of every hack. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't plant time bombs or backdoors. I simply didn't explain the ghosts in the machine. As security escorted me out that afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of anger, relief, and anticipation. I had given 11 years to Arcturine. I had nursed their Frankenstein's monster of a billing system through countless crises. And now I was being discarded because some CEO's son wanted to play tech visionary. 3 weeks passed. I took a vacation for the first time in years, went hiking in Colorado, ate at restaurants without checking my phone every 5 minutes for system alerts. I slept through the night without dreaming about database indices or API response codes. Then my phone exploded with notifications. First came texts from former colleagues. What the hell is happening? Did you see Twitter? Call me. Then came the news alerts. Arcturon Systems, billing fiasco. Customers charged thousands for penny transactions. Finally, LinkedIn messages from 3 different Arcturon board members, all asking if I was available for a call. I poured myself a generous glass of wine and opened Twitter to see what was happening. The hashtag #OneCentGate was trending. Customers were posting screenshots of their bank statements showing charges of $9,800, $13,200, even $27,500, all for services that should have cost mere dollars. One viral post showed a receipt for a $1.00 subscription charge alongside a bank statement showing a $100,000 debit from Arcturon. I switched to Reddit, where our personal finance was in full meltdown. Someone had started a class action lawsuit sign-up form. Others were posting instructions for how to dispute charges and freeze accounts. Then my phone rang. It was Damon, the UI lead. "What the actual fuck did you do?" he asked when I answered. "I didn't do anything." I replied honestly. "What's happening?" "Everything's on fire. The billing system started sending out invoices with completely wrong amounts yesterday. Thousands of customers got overcharged. The payment processor froze our account. Tyler's blaming some malicious code you left behind." I laughed. "That's rich." I didn't leave any code behind, malicious or otherwise. Did they deploy the new system already? No, that's nowhere near ready. They were making changes to the existing system. Tyler decided we needed to clean up technical debt before the big migration. He had the interns, junior architects removing redundant code. "Let me guess," I said, taking a sip of wine. "They found functions that seemed unnecessary and removed them." "Something like that. All I know is the normalization layer went haywire. Transactions are multiplied by 10,000s or something." I closed my eyes, immediately seeing the issue. "They removed the currency normalization functions, didn't they?" "I don't know the details," Damon said. "But Tyler's telling everyone you deliberately hid critical information to sabotage the company." "That's an interesting theory," I replied. "Did he check the Git logs to see who actually removed the code?" "I don't think so. He's been in emergency meetings with his dad and the board all day." I smiled to myself. "Well, I wish you all the best of luck. I'm sure Tyler's innovation team will figure it out." 2 days later, the full picture emerged through various former colleagues who called to either blame me or commiserate. Tyler had instructed his team to clean up the legacy codebase by removing redundant functions. They had identified several methods tagged with normalized legacy invoice currency that seemed to just pass data through with minor modifications. These functions had been in place since 2012 and looked unnecessary to fresh eyes. What Tyler and his team didn't understand was that our database still stored monetary values in an old format from our first payment processor amounts were stored as integer cents multiplied by 10,000 for subcent precision. Those redundant functions were silently converting between this legacy storage format and the current one used by our payment integrations. Remove those functions, and suddenly every dollar became $10,000. The carnage was extensive. Over 15,000 customers had been overcharged. The payment processor had suspended Arcturon's account due to the suspicious activity. The company had violated its SLA with major clients. Regulatory bodies were asking questions. And their stock had dropped 37% in 2 days. A week after the incident began, I received a call from a number I recognized: Richard Grant, Tyler's father and Arcturon's CEO. "Mara," he said when I answered, his voice tight and strained. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied. "Tyler tells me you deliberately withheld documentation about critical system components." I took my time responding. I provided an overview of all systems as requested. I wasn't asked to create detailed documentation of functions that were supposedly being replaced anyway. "You knew those functions were essential to the system's operation." "I did." I agreed. I also warned Tyler against removing code he didn't understand. He called me a dinosaur and showed me the door. There was a long pause on the line. I could almost hear Richard's internal struggle between defending his son and facing reality. "We didn't know what your code actually did," he finally admitted, his voice quieter. "We need help. Please." "What exactly are you asking for?" "We need you to fix the system. Tell us what was removed and how to restore it." I let the silence stretch for a moment. "I'm not interested in coming back as an employee." "We can discuss a consulting arrangement," Richard offered quickly. "Name your price." "My terms are simple," I said. "I retain intellectual property rights to any logic I recreate. I'll work for 1 day only. Payment in advance, non-refundable, $30,000. Richard didn't even hesitate. "Done. Can you start tomorrow?" "I'll be there at 9 a.m. I arrived at Arcturon's offices the next morning, dressed in my best consultant outfit: black blazer, crisp white shirt, dark jeans, no Patagonia vest required. The atmosphere was funereal. Developers hunched over monitors with hollow eyes. Customer service representatives were on endless calls with irate clients. The executive floor, usually buzzing with important meetings, was silent except for the occasional hushed conversation. Richard met me in the lobby himself, something he'd never done in all my years there. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "We've set you up in the main conference room. Whatever you need, just ask." "I'll need direct database access, admin credentials for all systems, and the Git history for the past month," I replied. "Of course. And Tyler?" "I don't need to interact with Tyler." I cut him off. "In fact, I prefer not to." Richard nodded. "He's been reassigned to explore AI initiatives for now." The conference room had been transformed into an emergency command center. Whiteboards covered with desperate diagrams lined the walls. Laptops and empty coffee cups cluttered the long table. A projection screen showed a real-time dashboard of system alerts, all red. Jasmine, one of the developers who had worked under Tyler, approached me hesitantly. "I'm so sorry, Mara. We didn't understand what those functions were doing." I gave her a reassuring smile. "That's why documentation and knowledge transfer are important. Let's see what we're dealing with." I spent the first hour reviewing Git logs and identifying exactly what had been removed. Just as I suspected, Tyler had personally approved the removal of 6 core functions that handled currency normalization. His commit message read, "Removing redundant legacy code for cleaner architecture." Next, I examined the database to ensure no data corruption had occurred. Fortunately, the storage was intact. The problem was purely in the processing layer. By noon, I had mapped out everything that needed to be restored. I gathered the development team minus Tyler to explain what had happened and what needed to be fixed. The original system was built in 2008. I began drawing on a whiteboard. Back then, the payment processor required amounts to be sent as integer cents multiplied by 10,000 for fractional cent calculations. When we switched processors in 2012, the new API expected decimal dollars. But we couldn't migrate all the historical data without downtime. I sketched out the data flow. So we created these normalization functions that silently converted between formats. To the rest of the code, it looked like simple dollars and cents, but the database still stored everything in the old format. One of the junior developers raised his hand. But why wasn't this documented in the code itself? It was, I replied, in comments that were apparently ignored, and in the function names with legacy and normalize explicitly stated. I turned back to the whiteboard. There's more. Some payment types, specifically recurring subscriptions set up before 2014, are still processed through the old payment gateway as a fallback. That gateway expects the 10,000x format. The normalization functions handled both cases, sending each transaction to the right place in the right format. Understanding dawned on their faces. Without those functions, new transactions were being processed at 10,000 times their intended value, while some older recurring transactions were being processed at $110,000 of their value, practically zero. What about the vendor integrations? Asked Damon. Those are failing too. I nodded. Same issue, different symptoms. Vendor 083, that's what we called Bank of Western Commerce, internally has a quirk where they expect months to have 31.5 days for daily rate calculations. Don't ask why. Their documentation from 2011 said to do it that way. And we complied. I continued explaining the various ghosts that haunted Arcturon's billing system. The half-day adjustment needed for transactions crossing the international date line, the special handling for leap years affecting annual subscriptions, the currency conversion buffer for volatile markets. The team watched in astonishment as I reconstructed these complex business rules from memory, without referring to notes. How do you remember all this? Whispered Jasmine. I lived it, I replied simply. I was there when each of these problems emerged and when we solved them. That's what institutional knowledge is, the accumulation of scars from past battles. By mid-afternoon, I had written 42 lines of code that restored the critical normalization functions. We deployed them to the test environment, ran a sample of transactions, and verified they processed correctly. That should fix the immediate crisis, I announced to the team. But you still have hundreds of edge cases that need proper handling. I've documented the most critical ones here. I handed over a USB drive with my notes. Richard appeared at the conference room door. Is it working? I nodded. The core functions are restored. You should be able to process new transactions correctly now, but you'll need to deal with all the incorrect charges manually. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, Mara. Truly. Would you consider staying on longer? We clearly need your expertise. No, I said firmly. But I'm establishing my own consulting firm, Jensen Logic, specializing in legacy system maintenance and modernization. You're welcome to engage my services at my standard rate. Richard didn't even blink. Whatever you're charging, we'll pay it. I gathered my things and headed for the door, then paused. One piece of advice, Richard. Next time you want to modernize a complex system, start by understanding what you already have. The past isn't technical debt, it's institutional wealth. I walked out of Arcturon for the second time, but under very different circumstances. This time, security didn't escort me. This time, people watched me leave with respect rather than pity. 2 months later, Jensen Logic was thriving. I had 3 former Arcturon developers working for me and clients across the financial industry who needed help maintaining their own legacy systems. It turned out there were a lot of companies running on code bases that only 1 or 2 people truly understood. Arcturon remained my biggest client, paying $12,000 monthly for a maintenance retainer essentially, keeping their system from catching fire again. Tyler had been quietly moved to an advisory role without direct reports. The microservices rewrite continued, but at a more realistic pace and with proper knowledge transfer protocols in place. I never spoke publicly about what happened at Arcturon. I didn't need to. The industry is small, and word gets around. I didn't burn the bridge, I just removed the support beams and waited for nature to take its course. And now they paid me to watch over the ruins. When people ask me about Arcturon, I simply say, legacy isn't the code. It's the one who knew where the ghosts lived and didn't tell you. Sometimes the most powerful code you write is the one that's invisible, the institutional knowledge that walks out the door when companies discard their outdated employees. Tyler learned that lesson the hard way. And I learned that being a dinosaur in tech isn't so bad after all. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for 165 million years. Silicon Valley bros have managed about a decade. So if you're a young hotshot thinking about cleaning up legacy code, you don't understand. Remember this, that spaghetti mess keeping the lights on was written by people who solved real problems under real constraints. Respect the archaeology before you bulldoze the site. And if you're a veteran developer being pushed aside by the next wave of disruptors, take heart, know your worth, document selectively. And remember that revenge isn't about sabotage, it's about letting natural consequences unfold while you sip coffee from a safe distance. Arcturon learned there's a difference between code that looks pretty and code that works. They discovered that sometimes, the person who understands the problem is more valuable than the person who knows the latest framework. They found out, painfully, that institutional knowledge walks out on two legs. I didn't need to sabotage their system. I just let them discover what they'd lost when they decided I was expendable. And when everything collapsed around them, I was there to pick up the pieces at 5 times my former salary. Now I help companies understand and preserve their technical heritage while thoughtfully modernizing their systems. Not because I want to protect obsolete technology, but because I respect the history encoded in those lines of ugly code. Every hack has a story. Every workaround solved a real problem. Every commentless function contains the ghost of a 2 a.m. production crisis from years ago. These aren't fossils to be discarded, they're battle scars that tell us where the mines are buried. Tyler wanted to move fast and break things. He succeeded spectacularly at the second part. As for me, I moved deliberately and fixed things. And business is booming. Legacy isn't the code. It's the one who knew where the ghost lived and didn't tell you.